Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
For 5 years, the woman had been saving for an apartment for her parents, but her husband had already hung his mother's robe in the bathroom. "I already promised this apartment to my mom," he announced, and immediately received an envelope with the documents. Lucia rubbed her irritated eyes and pushed the computer monitor away from her. The clock showed 10 p.m., but the work had to be finished today, yet another urgent project, yet another late night. She had been working as a lead designer at an advertising agency for 5 years, and each month her salary steadily filled the cherished savings account. Her phone screen lit up with a message from Carlos. "Are you coming soon?" "I've heated up dinner." Lucia sighed. Her husband always got home earlier. He worked as a history teacher at a school not far from home. The salary was small but stable, and the schedule was convenient. Sometimes Lucia even envied him. He would get home while it was still light outside, whereas she returned home in the dark, no matter the season. Another half an hour, she typed back and reached for her sandwich. She had long missed lunch. There was simply too much work piled up. An image floated before her eyes, her parents' tiny apartment in an old neighborhood, the corner of the room where a yellow stain from the last leak marred the ceiling. The upstairs neighbors constantly flooded them, and there was no money for repairs. A metal bucket stood in the middle of the room whenever it rained. The communal kitchen with a stove that barely worked. Her mother trying to cook lunch on the one working burner, which everyone shared. Lucia clenched her fists. "Just a little more, just a bit longer," she told Carlos casually as she poked at the cold dinner with her fork. "I found another side job. I'll have to work this weekend." Her husband raised an eyebrow. "Again? You promised last weekend that we'd visit my parents." Lucia suppressed her irritation. "We visited your parents 2 weeks ago. And a month before that, and before that." Okay. Carlos raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, "but my mom will be offended. You know how she feels about family dinners." Lucia bit her lip, as if she didn't know. As if Carmen didn't hint every single time that a proper wife should manage both work and family. As if those dinners didn't always turn into interrogations. "When will there be grandchildren? Why don't you visit more often? Why does Lucia always look so worn out? Why does she dress so plainly? Tell your mom I'm sorry, but there's a crunch at work." "And my mom's birthday is in a month," Carlos added, almost casually. "Maybe we could give her something big? She's been dreaming of a new TV for a while now." Lucia swallowed hard. A new TV would cost at least €1,000, money she could add to their savings. "Carlos, we've already discussed this, first an apartment for my parents, then everything else." "But it's her birthday," Carlos whined, "and her 60th, no less." She was hinting she'd like a big celebration. "When has your mom not hinted?" Lucia almost said, but bit her tongue. Instead, she slowly put her fork down and looked him straight in the eyes. "We made an agreement 5 years ago. Remember? I saved for my parents' apartment, and you don't touch that money. It's my salary, Carlos, mine. I deny myself everything: new clothes, makeup, vacations. When's the last time you saw me at a hair salon?" Carlos winced. I remember. I just thought, never mind, forget it," he said, turning away in annoyance. Lucia felt a pang of guilt. It was true, she often took her frustration out on her husband. Work, constant stress, endless counting of every euro, it was exhausting. But it was all for a good cause, for the parents who had given everything for her. "Sorry," Lucia tried to smile, "I'm just really tired. Let's not talk about it now. Tell me instead, how was your day?" Carlos thought a bit and started talking about school matters. Lucia listened half-heartedly, running numbers in her head. "There's almost €80,000 in the account now. My parents will add their 10,000. With the recent price increases, we're about 20,000 short. If I keep up this pace, we can start looking for a place in 6 months." The next day, rushing into the supermarket after work, Lucia ran into Carmen. Her mother-in-law was standing at the deli counter, scrutinizing the sausages with a critical eye. Lucia! Carmen exclaimed with feigned joy. What a surprise! I decided to treat myself, she nodded toward the display of delicacies. You only live once, right? Lucia glanced into her own shopping basket, pasta, the cheapest cheese, discounted chicken thighs, and tea bags. Over the years, she had learned to hunt for bargains and budget every penny. True, Lucia said politely. You look pale, Carmen observed critically, looking her up and down. And you're always wearing the same old things. Carlosito tells me you're completely buried in work. That's not right, dear. A woman should blossom, otherwise the husband gets bored. Lucia clenched her teeth. I'm just saving money. Yes, Carlosito told me, Carmen waved dismissively. Always saving for something, but life is passing you by. My friend Rosa, you know, the one on the third floor, well, her daughter-in-law. Lucia stopped listening. She had a sudden, aching urge to grab the most expensive dry-cured sausage and throw it into her basket, just out of spite, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. It would have been a waste of money. So, as I'm saying, family should always come first, Carmen finished her monologue. You two should come over on Sunday, I'll bake pies. Thanks for the invitation, but I'll be working on Sunday, Lucia forced a smile. I'll tell Carlos to stop by. Working again? Carmen threw up her hands. No, something's wrong with you and Carlosito. Family time is what matters most, and you're always disappearing somewhere. I disappear to work, to earn money for an apartment for my parents, Lucia wanted to shout, but she stayed silent. Carmen had never tried to understand their situation, she just constantly demanded attention, gifts, visits, and Carlos always took his mother's side. Bidding her mother-in-law goodbye, Lucia hurried to the checkout, her mood ruined. She thought about her own parents, modest, never asking for anything. How her father patched up the leaky roof with his own hands to save on repair costs, how her mother mended old curtains because they couldn't afford new ones. They deserved a decent home, and she was going to make sure they had one, no matter what it took. Friday evening. Lucia opened her secret file on the computer, a spreadsheet with all her calculations. She updated it every week, keeping track of how much she had saved and how much was still needed. It was her private ritual, her source of motivation. Carlos had gone out with friends for a few beers, a weekly tradition he never skipped. Lucia didn't mind, it came out of his personal budget. They had long ago divided their finances, a joint account for household expenses, with each contributing equally, and separate accounts for personal spending. Well, equally was a bit of a stretch. Lucia earned 3 times more than her husband, but she never threw it in his face. She simply saved her share for the dream, while Carlos spent his on beers with friends, new gadgets, and gifts for his mother. The closer she got to her goal, the more anticipation Lucia felt. Sometimes she even browsed real estate listings to better visualize what they could afford, a 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood, bright, with a balcony. Her parents would be so happy. Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was her father calling. Hi, Dad, Lucia smiled into the phone. Sweetheart, her father's voice sounded tense, we've got a bit of a situation. We had another flood, the neighbor upstairs left the bathtub running, and now water's everywhere. We just got home and there's ankle-deep water. Lucia jumped to her feet. I'm coming over now. No need, we've already called emergency services. But maybe you could find us a good repairman? The ceiling collapsed, and the wiring soaked. I'm afraid to deal with it myself, there could be electrical problems. Of course, Dad. I'll come over in the morning and organize everything. Lucia hung up and buried her face in her hands. Another repair, more expenses, patching up that crumbling old apartment yet again, she thought. It's okay, she said aloud to herself. Just a little longer. It'll all be over soon. She opened her spreadsheet and added another line, plus €5,000, her latest freelance project payment. With this amount and a bonus promised for next month, Lucia froze, staring at the numbers. If I don't send the money to my parents for ceiling and wiring repairs, if I take the bonus when it comes, and if my parents add their savings, we could start looking for a new apartment right now. Her heart began to race. Could it really be? After 5 years of saving, sacrificing, overworking, is it finally happening? Lucia grabbed her phone and dialed her mother's number. Mom, remember we talked about getting you an apartment? I think we can start looking right now. Her mother's voice trembled. Really? Lucia, sweetheart, are you sure? Yes, Mom. I've done the math, we can do it. I did it. Just then the front door slammed. Carlos was home earlier than usual. Lucia heard his footsteps in the hallway and hurriedly added, We'll talk tomorrow when I come over. Love you and Dad. She closed the spreadsheet and shut down the computer just as her husband poked his head into the room. Who were you whispering with? Carlos asked, leaning against the doorframe. My mom, Lucia replied, trying to keep her voice calm. Another flood. I'm going over tomorrow to see what can be done. Again? Carlos grimaced. Maybe they should just move out already. How long can they stay in that dump? Lucia stared at her husband silently. If only you knew how close we are to that. But all she said was, Things will change soon. I promise. And at that moment, she knew for certain she would keep that promise, no matter what it took. Lucia sat in the real estate agency office, nervously tapping her foot against the floor. Irene, a businesslike middle-aged woman with a flawless manicure, was flipping through printouts of available apartments. This one might interest you, she said, turning the monitor toward Lucia. A 2-bedroom in a brick building, 2nd floor, enclosed balcony, separate bathroom and toilet, and, importantly, it's within your budget. Lucia stared at the photos, bright rooms, ceilings without cracks or stains, a clean entryway. Her heart pounded faster. Can we see it today? Of course, Irene nodded. I'll arrange with the owner for this evening. Is 6 o'clock good for you? Yes, Lucia exhaled shakily. And the documents? Everything's clean, sole owner, no registered tenants, no debts. If you like it, we can proceed with the deposit. However, Irene paused, you mentioned you wanted to register it in your mother's name. That's fine, but it's best if she's present for the viewing and the signing. Of course, I'll bring her. On her way to work, Lucia couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept drifting back to the apartment. Will it work out? Will Mom like it? What if someone else snatches it up first? The first thing she did at the office was call her parents. Mom, I found an option. We're going to see it today at 6. Can you make it? Her mother's voice was trembling with excitement. Lucia, sweetheart, of course I can. Dad will get time off from work too. And one more thing, Lucia lowered her voice, even though the office was empty, if we like it, we'll sign everything over to you right away, so there won't be any, she hesitated, unwilling to say aloud what she was thinking, so there won't be any claims from Carlos. I understand, her mother said calmly. Don't worry, Dad and I are prepared. We'll have the money with us. Hanging up, Lucia sat thinking. She hadn't told Carlos about her plans. Every time they talked about the savings, he would start going on about the family budget and how husband and wife are one flesh, and that jointly acquired property belongs to both spouses. But Lucia was smarter than that. She had consulted a lawyer beforehand. If the apartment was registered in her mother's name and not hers, Carlos wouldn't be able to make any claim to it under any circumstances. It wouldn't be considered joint marital property, it would be a gift to her parents. The apartment turned out even better than in the photos, a spacious kitchen with a balcony, 2 separate rooms, and a newly renovated bathroom. Lucia's mother walked around the rooms with the look of someone stepping into a palace. Her father was tapping the walls and checking the plumbing with a businesslike air, and from the expression on his face, Lucia could tell he liked it. Should we take it? Lucia whispered to her mother when the agent stepped aside to make a call. Her mother squeezed her hand tightly. Sweetheart, this is like a dream. Are we really going to live here? Tears welled up in her mother's eyes, and Lucia felt her own eyes sting. 5 years of saving, 5 years without vacations and new clothes, 5 years of constant pressure. It hadn't been for nothing. You will, Mom. You definitely will. Well, have you decided? Irene asked as she returned, looking at their brightened faces. Yes, Lucia said firmly. We're putting down the deposit. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur: paperwork, trips to the bank, endless phone calls and meetings. Lucia was like a squirrel on a wheel, spinning between work and finalizing the purchase. Carlos didn't seem to notice anything. Lucia carefully avoided conversations about money, and when he asked why she was out so often, she gave vague answers: work stuff, helping my parents with the renovation. One evening, while they were sitting in the kitchen having tea, Carlos suddenly asked, "So how much have you saved now for your parents' apartment?" Lucia almost choked. "Why do you ask?" "No reason, just curious," he shrugged. "You've been saving for so many years." "Around 80,000 euros, Lucia lied, mentally subtracting the deposit already paid. "Not bad," Carlos whistled. "And how much more do you need?" "1.5 million, probably." Lucia looked away. "Prices keep going up," Carlos said, thoughtfully spinning his teacup in his hands. "You know, I was thinking, maybe some of that money could be used for something else. Like helping my mom with her place. Her apartment isn't in great shape either." Lucia froze. Here it is, the moment she had feared. Carlos had finally decided to lay claim to her savings. "We had an agreement," Lucia began cautiously. "This money is only for an apartment for my parents." "Yes, I understand," Carlos quickly agreed, "but maybe just a small part, to help my mom get a new kitchen, for example. She's been dreaming about it for so long." "Carlos," Lucia looked him straight in the eyes, "your mother has a 3-bedroom apartment. Yes, it's not new, but it's hers. My parents live in a tiny old flat with constant floods. Please, don't compare." All right, Carlos raised his hands in surrender. "Forget I said anything." But Lucia saw the change in his expression, saw how something clicked in his mind. He was starting to calculate how he might get access to her money. "It's fine," she thought. "Soon it'll all be over, and the money will be tied up in the apartment. Let him try to get anything then." The day of the signing was sunny and warm, as if even the weather was celebrating with Lucia and her parents. Everything went smoothly at the notary's office. The documents were checked, the money was transferred, the contract was signed. The apartment was now officially owned by Maria Gonzalez, Lucia's mother. "Congratulations on your new home," the notary smiled, handing over a folder with the documents. "Now all that's left is to get the keys, and you can start celebrating your housewarming." Outside the office, Lucia hugged her parents tightly. "There you go, you're officially homeowners now." Her father discreetly wiped a tear from his eye. "Lucia, we'll never forget what you've done for us." "Don't be silly, Dad," she said gently, patting him on the shoulder. "You've spent your whole life taking care of me. It's my turn now." "So, when do we move in?" her mother asked businesslike, though her voice trembled with emotion. "Let's get the keys first and check the apartment again. Then we'll plan the move," Lucia suggested. "There are still a few small things to sort out, curtains to hang, some furniture to buy." "I can move the bed from the old place," her father immediately offered. "And the wardrobe too, no need to spend extra money." Lucia smiled. "Dad, maybe it's time we bought some new furniture, the old stuff is falling apart." "We'll see," he said uncertainly, a lifetime of scrimping and saving deeply ingrained in him. That evening, Lucia returned home with the keys to her parents' new apartment in her bag. She felt strange, emptied out, but at the same time filled with a new, bright feeling, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Carlos was sitting in front of the TV with a bottle of beer. Hearing the door slam, he turned around. "Where have you been?" "I called, you didn't answer." "Sorry, my phone died," Lucia lied. In fact, she had just put it on silent so nothing would distract her during the signing. I was with my parents, helping them with some chores. She had decided not to tell Carlos about the apartment yet, not until her parents had actually moved in. For some reason, she felt Carlos could ruin it. He might start making claims on the money or even on the apartment itself, or pick a fight. She wanted this moment to stay clean, untouched by quarrels and accusations. I bought pizza, Carlos said. Want some? Thanks, but no, I had a bite at my parents'. Lucia walked into the bathroom, turned on the water, and leaned against the wall. Tears ran down her cheeks, tears of relief and joy. She had done it. She had kept her promise. In the days that followed, Lucia helped her parents prepare for the move, shopping for furniture, textiles, and kitchenware. Her father kept trying to pick the cheapest options, but Lucia stood her ground. Dad, I didn't spend all these years saving just so you could keep cutting corners on everything. Let's get a good bed, one that won't hurt your backs. Lucia's mother walked around the new apartment as if enchanted, constantly touching the walls as though she couldn't believe it was real. She was already planning where to put the sofa, where to hang photos, and where to set up a little reading nook. I've dreamed for so many years of having a quiet place to read, she said, standing by the window in the small room. Without neighbors through the wall, without constant noise and arguments. On moving day, Lucia took the day off from work. They hired a van to move only the most valuable things from the old apartment, family photo albums, beloved books, the special dishes her mother had kept for important occasions. Her father kept checking the locks, the pipes, the light switches in the new place, as if he couldn't quite believe it all belonged to them now. Lucia watched him with tenderness, her strong, proud father who had spent his life trying to provide for the family but had never managed to escape the grip of poverty. Once the main things were moved, they sat in the new kitchen. Her mother pulled out a bottle of champagne she had been saving for a special occasion. To the new home, her father said, raising a plastic cup, and to our daughter, who made this possible. Lucia felt tears prick at her eyes again. To you, to your happiness, she said. They stayed there late into the evening, reminiscing, laughing, and sometimes crying. For the first time in years, Lucia saw her parents without the usual tension in their faces, saw them straighten their shoulders as if shaking off a heavy burden. When Lucia got home, Carlos wasn't back from work yet. She reheated some dinner and sat down at the computer, time to go through her work emails. Among them was one from the agent Irene. Dear Lucia, congratulations again on your purchase. Just a reminder that post-sale service is included. If you have any questions about documents, utilities, or neighbors, don't hesitate to reach out. Lucia smiled. It really happened. My parents are in their new apartment, the paperwork is done, the money was well spent. Now she could finally breathe a little, maybe even allow herself a small indulgence. A new dress? A haircut? After 5 years of denying herself everything, she didn't even know where to begin. The front door slammed, and she heard Carlos's footsteps in the hallway. Hey, he poked his head into the room. You're home early today. Took the day off, Lucia quickly closed the email. Was helping my parents with the renovation. Another renovation? Carlos frowned. How much longer are they going to pour money into that old dump? Wouldn't it be better to save faster for a place of their own? Lucia stayed silent. She decided not to tell him about the apartment just yet, not until her parents had fully moved in, updated all their documents, and registered their new address. After that she would tell him. I reheated dinner, she changed the subject. Want some? Sure, Carlos stretched. I'm beat, finals are coming up and everyone's on edge. Over dinner he talked about school, and Lucia nodded, lost in her own thoughts. How strange, she thought, I just achieved my biggest dream, and my husband doesn't even know, doesn't share my joy, my triumph. Once we were closer, once I used to tell him everything. When did we start drifting apart? Was it when I began saving for my goal? Or when he started talking more and more about how to spend my money? Lucia didn't know the answer. She only felt the wall that had grown between them, and she wasn't sure she wanted to tear it down. A week passed. Lucia's parents were now fully settled in their new apartment. They called her every day, telling her about their little discoveries, how nice it was to have breakfast in their own kitchen without bumping into neighbors, how quiet it was at night, how the new neighbors were happy that decent, quiet people had moved in after the previous, hard-drinking tenants. Lucia savored their happiness. Finally, she allowed herself to relax a little. She booked an appointment at the hairdresser's and bought herself a new dress. The money that once went to savings could now, at least in part, be spent on herself. Carlos noticed the changes. "You look different. Did something happen?" Carlos asked. "I just decided to update my wardrobe a little," Lucia shrugged. "I've been wearing the same things for 5 years." "And what about the savings for the apartment?" He squinted at her. "Or did you decide to take a break?" "No, I just can afford a bit more than before." Carlos stayed silent, thinking about something. Then he said casually, "By the way, Mom needs help with the bathroom repairs. The pipes are completely worn out. Maybe we could set aside a bit from your savings? After all, families should help each other." Lucia pressed her lips together. "Carlos, we've discussed this already. My savings are for my parents' apartment." "Oh, come on," he smiled. "You can spare a little for other needs, especially since buying the apartment is still a long way off." "If only you knew," Lucia thought, but aloud she said, "Sorry, but no. It's my decision, and I'm not changing it." Carlos slammed the kitchen door and stormed off into the other room. Lucia heard him speaking loudly on the phone, no doubt complaining to his mother. She sighed. She needed to decide when and how to tell her husband about the apartment purchase. Each day it was getting harder. The phone rang on Sunday morning. Lucia was still asleep. Carlos was already up, busying himself in the kitchen. "Lou, it's your mom," he called from the hallway. Lucia reached for her phone. "Hi, Mom. Is something wrong?" "Lucia," her mother's voice sounded excited, "we have such great news. We got our registration done. No more old apartment." "That's wonderful," Lucia smiled, trying to keep her voice down. "I'm so happy for you. Come visit today. We want to celebrate. I baked your favorite pie, and your dad wants to give you a little present." "Of course I'll come." Lucia glanced at the door, checking if Carlos could hear her. "Just me today. Without Carlos, he's busy." "All right, dear, we'll expect you for lunch." After hanging up, Lucia sat thinking. Maybe today is the day to tell Carlos the truth? But something told her it wasn't the right time yet. First, she wanted to enjoy this moment with her parents, free from the shadow of any quarrel or resentment. She got up and went to the kitchen. Carlos was rummaging through a cupboard. "Good morning," Lucia said. "I'm going to visit my parents today, okay?" Again, he turned around. "You were there 2 days ago." "It's my mom's birthday," Lucia lied. "A small family gathering." "So I'm not invited?" Carlos's voice had a hint of hurt. "You know how cramped their old apartment is," Lucia avoided his gaze. "Just the closest family," Carlos shrugged. "All right, go ahead. I'll probably drop by my mom's. She said she needs help with something." With the bathroom repairs, Lucia finished mentally, "for which she wants my money." Her parents' apartment had been transformed, new curtains, a sofa in the living room, a small television, and framed photographs on the walls, Lucia as a child, her parents in their youth, family celebrations. "It's become so cozy here," Lucia said, looking around. "All thanks to you, sweetheart," her mother hugged her. "Every day we thank fate for giving us a daughter like you." Her father took a small box out of the closet. "Your mother and I want to give you something as a token of our gratitude." Lucia opened the box and froze. Inside was her grandmother's necklace, an antique piece with small amethysts. "Dad, this is Grandma's heirloom. She left it to you." "And now I'm giving it to you," her father said, squeezing her hand. "You've earned it." Lucia tried on the necklace. It fit perfectly around her neck, as if it had been made for her. "Thank you," she whispered, hugging her parents. But the greatest reward for me is seeing you happy. Over lunch, they talked about the future, about plans. Her parents wanted to create a little garden on the balcony. Her mother dreamed of a bookshelf in the small room. Her father had already met the neighbors and found a friend, a retired engineer, someone he could discuss technical things with. And how did Carlos react to the purchase? Her mother suddenly asked. Is he happy for us? Lucia hesitated. I haven't told him yet. Her parents exchanged a glance. Why? Her father asked gently. I don't know, Lucia lowered her eyes. I'm afraid he might react badly. You know how his mother is always asking for help, for money. I'm afraid he might make a claim, her father finished for her. But the apartment's in your mother's name. He has no rights to it. I know. But it's still unpleasant. Her mother took Lucia's hand. Sweetheart, you can't hide it forever. Sooner or later, he'll find out. I'll tell him, Lucia nodded. Soon. When I find the right moment. But deep down, she feared that conversation. She was afraid of seeing in Carlos's eyes what she was beginning to suspect, that he hadn't married her for love, but for calculation, that he was only interested in her money. When she got home that evening, Carlos still wasn't back. She took a shower, changed into her home clothes, and settled on the couch with a book. Late at night, the front door slammed. Carlos appeared in the doorway, disheveled, his eyes red. Where have you been? Lucia asked. At my mother's. He slumped into an armchair. We were talking. About what? Different things. Carlos avoided her gaze. About life, about family, about the future. Something in his tone put Lucia on edge. What's wrong, Carlos? He was silent for a moment, then raised his eyes. I want my mother to move in with us. Lucia froze. What? Carmen can't live with my father anymore. Carlos spoke quickly, as if afraid she'd interrupt him. He started drinking again, hit her. She needs to get out of there immediately. And you're suggesting she live here? Lucia struggled to contain her outrage. In our 2-bedroom apartment? Temporarily, Carlos raised his hands defensively. Until we find another solution. Like what? Well, he hesitated, maybe rent her a place, or use some of your savings to help her. There it is, exactly where he was heading. No, Lucia said firmly. I won't spend the money I saved for my parents' apartment on your mother. But, Lou, Carlos leaned forward, she's in real danger. My dad could kill her in a drunken rage. She can go to the police, she can file for divorce, she can sell her apartment and buy a new one. She has options, Carlos. That night, Lucia couldn't sleep. Beside her, Carlos snored lightly, having turned his back to her in a show of indignation after their brief argument. Their conversation kept replaying in her mind, stirring anxiety and irritation. Heartless, that's what he had called her for refusing to give up the money she had saved through sweat and sacrifice, for not agreeing to let Carmen into their home and into their lives. Lucia knew her mother-in-law too well. If she moved in temporarily, she would never leave. She would slowly take over their home, interfere in their relationship, criticize Lucia at every turn, and Carlos, as always, would take his mother's side. Maybe it's time to tell him the truth, Lucia thought, staring at the ceiling. That the money is already spent, that my parents are already living in the new apartment. But something stopped her, a bad feeling, intuition, call it what you will. She just knew Carlos would react badly, very badly. The morning started with a cold silence. Carlos ate his sandwich standing up, refusing to sit at the table where Lucia was having her breakfast. How long are you going to sulk? She finally broke the silence. I'm not sulking, he shrugged. I'm just disappointed. I thought you understood what family means. Oh, I understand perfectly, Lucia set down her fork. Family means a husband and wife supporting each other, not a wife supporting her mother-in-law. No one's asking for support, Carlos raised his voice. It's about help, temporary support. That will turn into something permanent, Lucia shook her head. I know your mother too well, Carlos. She never solves her problems herself, she always looks for someone else to carry the burden. You just hate her, don't you? He threw his half-eaten sandwich into the trash. You've always hated her, even though she's always treated you well. Lucia almost choked. Treated me well? She criticizes my every move, meddles in our life, constantly hints that I'm a bad wife. That's not true, Carlos turned away. You're just trying to justify your stinginess. Stinginess? Lucia felt herself boiling. I've spent 5 years saving for my parents, denying myself basic things, and you call that stinginess? You're willing to do anything for your parents, Carlos hissed, but nothing for my mother. That's what hurts. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. I'm going to work. Think about your behavior. The door slammed, and Lucia was left alone. Her hands trembled with rage. How dare he accuse me of stinginess? How dare he demand that I give my hard-earned savings to his eternally dissatisfied, eternally demanding, eternally manipulative mother? Maybe it's time to start thinking about divorce, the thought flashed through her mind, and she was startled at how natural it sounded, as if she had been thinking it for a long time but hadn't admitted it to herself. The day dragged on endlessly. Lucia couldn't focus on work, replaying the morning's conversation over and over in her head. At lunch, her mother called. Lucia, how are you? You sound a little strange. I'm fine, Mom, Lucia tried to sound upbeat. Just a lot of work. Did you tell Carlos? Her mother asked cautiously. Not yet, Lucia sighed. The situation got more complicated. His mother either wants to move in with us or have us rent her an apartment, with my money, of course. Oh, her mother's voice was full of concern. And what have you decided? I refused, of course. Now Carlos is saying I'm heartless and stingy. Her mother was silent for a moment and then said quietly, Sweetheart, maybe you should think about it. Are you sure you and Carlos are right for each other? Lucia felt her heart tighten. Even her mother, who had always supported her marriage, was beginning to have doubts. I don't know, Mom. Honestly, I don't know. You know you can always come to us, her mother's voice grew firmer. We have space now, room for you. Thank you, Mom, Lucia felt a lump in her throat. But it's too soon to talk about that. Maybe things will work out. But even she no longer believed it. That evening, Lucia stayed late at work. She didn't want to go home, didn't want to continue the morning's argument. Better to give Carlos time to cool off and think. When she finally returned, the apartment was quiet and empty. Carlos had left a note on the kitchen table. Went to Mom's. Don't wait up. Lucia crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Perfect. Just perfect. Now he'll go complain to his mother, and she'll start her campaign against me again. She opened the fridge, took out a bottle of wine left over from someone's birthday, and poured herself a glass. Family life, she thought bitterly. Not what I dreamed of. Her phone vibrated, a message from Carlos. Mom is very upset by your attitude. She thought you considered her part of the family. Lucia snorted. Poor, upset Carmen, who, in 5 years, never once asked how my parents were doing, who always spoke about them condescendingly, those people in the old flat. Lucia didn't reply. What's the point? Carlos won't hear my arguments or understand my feelings. He's always on his mother's side. Carlos returned late, when Lucia was already in bed. She heard him moving around in the hallway, then going into the bathroom. After a while, he quietly opened the bedroom door and stood in the doorway. I know you're not asleep, he said softly. Lucia didn't answer, keeping her eyes closed. We talked, my mom and I, Carlos continued. She's very hurt, but she's willing to compromise. Lucia sat up sharply. Compromise? What compromise? She's not living with us. Carlos spoke gently, as if coaxing a child. But she needs help paying for a rental apartment, at least for a while, until she figures out what to do about Dad and their place. And how much does she want? Lucia crossed her arms over her chest. Just enough for a one-bedroom rental. It's not much, Lou, just a drop in the ocean for you. And for you, she stared at her husband. Why can't you help your mother? Why should I? Carlos spread his hands. You know how much I make. I barely have enough for myself. But you have enough for beers with friends, Lucia pointed out. Enough for a new phone. But not enough to help your mother? Don't start, Carlos winced. I'm just asking you to help, as my wife, as part of the family. No, Lucia shook her head. I'm not paying for your mother's apartment. She has her own, let her solve her problems herself. My God, how heartless you are, Carlos raised his voice. My mother can't live with a man who beats her, is that so hard to understand? Why doesn't she divorce him? Why doesn't she sell the apartment and buy a separate one? Why is that supposed to be my problem? Carlos clenched his fists. Because you're my wife, because my family is your family too. And my parents, aren't they your family? Lucia felt a wave of anger rising inside her. Have you ever once asked how they're doing in that old apartment with the leaking roof? Have you ever once offered to help? That's different, Carlos looked away. Why is it different? She pressed. Because, he stammered. Because your parents have you, and your mother has only you, and so I'm supposed to support your mother? Lucia gave a bitter smile. How logical. Carlos spun around and stormed out of the bedroom, slamming the door. Lucia could hear him pacing around the apartment, muttering to himself, then the sound of the closet opening, and then a suitcase being zipped shut. Half an hour later he appeared in the bedroom doorway again. I'm going to stay at my mom's for a while, until you come to your senses. Lucia silently watched as he grabbed his keys, wallet, and phone charger from the nightstand. You know, Carlos said, standing in the doorway, I always thought marriage was about supporting each other, not about counting every penny and refusing to help. Leave, Lucia said quietly. Just leave. When the front door finally closed behind him, she allowed herself to cry, not from grief, not from loss, but from relief. As if the heavy burden she had carried for years had finally fallen from her shoulders. Carlos didn't come home or call for the next 2 days. Lucia didn't reach out to him either. She needed time to think, to figure out her feelings. For the first time in a long while, she felt an odd sense of peace, as if the apartment itself had more air. On the third day, coming home from work, Lucia noticed a strange key sticking out of the front door lock. Her whole body went tense. Someone tried to break in? Cautiously stepping inside, she heard rustling from the living room. There, standing by the cabinet, was Carmen, methodically rummaging through the shelves. What are you doing here? Lucia asked, so startled she didn't even raise her voice. Carmen flinched and turned around. Oh, Lucia, you scared me. I just came to help, to tidy up a bit. Who gave you the key? Lucia felt her anger building. Carlosito gave it to me, Carmen waved dismissively. He said I could come and get a few of his things. I figured I'd clean up a little while I was at it. There's so much dust here. Lucia spotted a bag on the sofa, stuffed full of men's shirts, pants, sweaters. You had no right to enter my apartment without permission, Lucia said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Please leave. Now. How rude. Carmen threw up her hands. I came to help, and you're kicking me out. No wonder Carlosito is so upset with you, with such an attitude. Leave. My house. Lucia enunciated every word. This is Carlosito's home too, Carmen straightened up, taking on a combative stance. He has every right to give me a key. No, he doesn't. Lucia reached for her phone. Either you leave right now, or I call the police for unlawful entry. Carmen paled. You wouldn't dare. I dare, Lucia said, already dialing. You have 1 minute. Muttering curses, Carmen grabbed the bag of clothes and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned around. Carlosito is right. You're a monster, not a wife. Poor boy. When the door closed behind her, Lucia slid down the wall and buried her face in her hands. This crossed every line. Carlos gave his mother a key to their apartment without telling her, let her rummage through their things, take whatever she pleased. She picked up her phone and dialed her husband's number. He answered after the 5th ring. Yeah. Did you give your mother a key to our apartment? Lucia tried to keep her voice calm, but it trembled with fury. So what? Carlos said defiantly. I needed my stuff. You could have come yourself or asked me to pack it. Mom offered to help, he snorted. I don't see the problem. The problem is that it's an invasion of my personal space, Lucia's voice rose. You had no right to give anyone a key without my permission. She's my mother, not just anyone, Carlos snapped, and this is our apartment, or have you forgotten? I'm changing the locks, Lucia said after a pause. And I don't recommend trying to enter without my permission. You're insane, Carlos nearly shouted. You can't forbid me from entering my own home. I can if you violate my boundaries. And besides, Lucia took a deep breath, I think we need to get a divorce, Carlos. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a nervous laugh. Divorce? Over a key? Are you serious? Not over a key, Lucia said quietly but firmly. Over the fact that you don't respect me, my feelings, my boundaries. Over the fact that you always choose your mother over me. Over the fact that you think my money is yours, and my problems don't matter. Money, money, Carlos sneered. It always comes down to money, doesn't it? You know, if we divorce, you won't get to keep all your precious savings, that's community property. I've already consulted a lawyer. Lucia's breath caught. There it is, what he really cares about, the money. You've consulted a lawyer, she repeated. When did you have time for that? Doesn't matter, Carlos muttered. The fact is, half of your savings legally belong to me, so think twice before pushing for a divorce. Don't worry. I'll think about it, Lucia said as calmly as she could. And you should too. She hung up and collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Everything was crystal clear now. Carlos had just been waiting for the right moment to get his hands on my money. And now, since I refused to help his mother, he's using the threat of divorce to get it. If only he knew, Lucia thought with a bitter smile, if only he knew the money is already gone. The next day, she took a day off and went to her parents' place. They listened to her story with worry and sympathy. We've always told you, you can come home anytime, her mother said, hugging her. Especially now that we have proper living conditions. Thank you, Mom, Lucia pressed close to her. But I need to settle everything properly. The apartment Carlos and I live in, it's mine, from before the marriage. I'm not going to give it up. What about the savings? Her father asked cautiously. Can he really lay claim to them? He could have, Lucia smiled, if they still existed. But we already spent them on your apartment, and it's registered in Mom's name, not mine. Does Carlos know about this? Her mother frowned. No, Lucia shook her head. And I'm afraid of how he'll react when he finds out. Maybe you should tell him now, her father suggested. Before the situation gets worse. Lucia thought about it. Maybe it really is better to tell him the truth, to remove any illusions, to make Carlos understand there's nothing for him to get from the divorce. You're probably right, Dad. I'll tell him today. But she didn't get the chance to talk to him that day. Carlos wasn't answering his phone, and when Lucia returned home, she found a note. Went to the countryside with Mom, to her sisters. We'll be back in a couple of days. Lucia felt relieved. She had time to prepare for the conversation. She decided to use the delay wisely and meet with a lawyer to be sure of her rights. The lawyer, a young woman with a sharp gaze, listened carefully to Lucia's story. So, the apartment you live in with your husband, it belonged to you before the marriage, she clarified. And you never re-registered it jointly? No, It's only in my name, Lucia confirmed. And the savings your husband talks about, they were already spent on an apartment for your parents, registered in your mother's name? Yes, exactly. The lawyer smiled. In that case, your husband has no claim to either the apartment or the savings. The apartment is your premarital property, and the savings are gone, spent on a third party who is not a spouse. So he'll get nothing in the divorce? Lucia clarified. Only his personal property and half of any jointly acquired assets, the lawyer nodded. If you have joint bank accounts, major purchases made during the marriage, a car, a summer house, and so on. There's nothing like that, Lucia shook her head. We've always kept separate finances. The joint account was just for household expenses, and there's barely anything there. Then it's simple, the lawyer handed her a business card. If you decide to go through with the divorce, call me. We'll handle it quickly and without unnecessary problems. Carlos returned 3 days later. He didn't look great, rumpled, with dark circles under his eyes. Walking into the apartment, he went straight to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. We need to talk, Lucia said, following him. If it's about the divorce, I don't agree, Carlos said without looking at her. We can solve our problems if you just show a little understanding. It's not just about your mother, Lucia sat down across from him. It's about us, about how we've been living these past few years. You don't see me, my needs, my desires. You only care about money. That's not true, he said, banging his fist on the table. I've always cared about you. When? Lucia gave a bitter smile. When was the last time you asked how I was feeling? When did you care about my parents? When did you help me with anything other than washing dishes? Carlos stared at the floor, silent. And there's one more thing, Lucia took a deep breath. I have to tell you, the money is gone. He looked up. What? The savings you talked about with the lawyer, they're gone. I already spent them. How? Carlos paled. On what? On an apartment for my parents. We bought it a month ago. They're already living there. Something like panic flashed in Carlos's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid of exactly this reaction, Lucia looked him straight in the eyes. Afraid that you'd try to claim the money, try to take it for your mother. And where's this apartment? Carlos's voice grew tense. Is it in your name? No. It's in my mother's name. Lucia watched his face change, tension, realization, then anger. So it's not considered marital property. Carlos jumped up, knocking over his chair. You did this on purpose, to cheat me. I did this to help my parents, Lucia stayed calm. And yes, I registered it under my mother's name because it's a gift to her, not an investment. You, Carlos was choking with rage. How could you? That was my money too. No, Carlos, Lucia shook her head. It was my money, earned by me, saved from my salary. You have no claim to it. The law is on my side, he clenched his fists. My mother will live in that apartment. Everything earned in a marriage belongs to both spouses. Yes, if the money still existed, Lucia agreed. But it doesn't. It was spent on an apartment that belongs to my mother. No court will force her to sell it to give you half. Carlos stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, distrust, then realization, then fury crossing his face. You planned all of this, didn't you? He hissed. You calculated how to trick your husband, how to get around the law. And I already promised my mom that when we got a second apartment, she could live there. How can you not understand that? I simply protected what belonged to me and my parents, Lucia answered quietly. From someone who believes he has a right to other people's money. Carlos grabbed a cup from the table and hurled it against the wall, porcelain shattered into tiny shards. You'll regret this, he spat. I swear, you'll regret it. He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. For 3 days, Carlos didn't come home, didn't answer calls, didn't send messages. Lucia barely slept, tense and jumpy at every noise, imagining him breaking into the apartment, making demands or threats. But on the fourth day, he came back as if nothing had happened. Silently, he walked into the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and methodically began packing his things. "You're moving out?" Lucia asked, standing in the doorway. "What did you expect?" Carlos didn't look up. "After what you did." "I didn't do anything, Carlos." Lucia crossed her arms over her chest. "I helped my parents with the money I earned, just like I planned for 5 years." "You lied to me." He snapped the suitcase shut. "All these years, pretending we were saving together, pretending we were a family." "I never said the savings were joint." Lucia shook her head. "From the beginning, it was clear I was saving for my parents, from my salary." "But you're my wife." Carlos finally looked at her, his eyes filled with outrage. "There's no yours and mine in a marriage. If you had ever cared about my parents, if you had ever shown them the same care I showed your mother," Lucia said calmly, though her insides boiled, "maybe I would have thought differently. But you only cared about the money, not me, not my family, only what you could get from me." Carlos stayed silent, clenching and unclenching his fists. "Tell me honestly." Lucia took a step closer. "If you had known I was going to put the apartment in my mother's name, not mine, would you have tried to stop me? Would you have demanded half the money for your mother?" The silence stretched on, and then Carlos said, staring past her, "It's not about the money, it's about trust." "Answer the question," Lucia insisted. "Yes." Carlos suddenly shouted. "Yes, I would have demanded my share, because it's fair, because your parents are already living in their old apartment, and my mother suffers daily beatings from a drunkard. But you don't care about her, you never have. You see?" Lucia smiled sadly. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you. I knew you would think only about yourself, about how to get your hands on my money." "It's our money." Carlos grabbed his suitcase, "ours, and I'll prove it." He brushed past her, hitting her shoulder, and headed for the door. "I'm filing for divorce," he said, turning at the door, "and for division of property. The apartment may be premarital, but everything else, we'll divide it. And I'll make sure the apartment you bought for your parents was done legally." "Check all you want," Lucia shrugged. "Everything is absolutely legal." When the door slammed behind him, she slowly sat down on the bed. Inside, there was only emptiness, no bitterness, no resentment, just the realization that the man she had spent 5 years with was not the person she thought he was. "How could I have been so blind?" Lucia thought, staring at the half-empty closet. "How could I not have seen that he only cared about the money?" The very next day, Lucia received a letter from Carlos's lawyer. In dry legal language, it detailed Carlos's claims to marital assets, including allegations that Lucia had illegally hidden funds by transferring them to third parties. Lucia immediately called the lawyer she had consulted before. "I've received a letter from my husband's lawyer," she said. "He's demanding to recognize the purchase of the apartment for my parents as illegal and to return half of the money spent." "Send me a copy of the letter," the lawyer replied briskly. "But don't worry just yet. If everything is as you told me, he doesn't stand a chance." That evening, Lucia's head was pounding. She sat in the kitchen, mindlessly flipping through the documents she had prepared for the lawyer. Will it really come to a court case? Will I really have to prove the obvious, that I had the right to help my parents? Her phone vibrated. It was her mother calling. "Sweetheart, how are you?" Her mother's voice sounded anxious. "I'm okay, Mom." Lucia tried to sound cheerful. "Just a bit tired." "Carlos called your father today," her mother said cautiously. "He said strange things, that we illegally took his money, that he's going to sue." Lucia went cold. "He called Dad? Why?" "I don't know," her mother sighed. "He was very aggressive. Your father got upset." "Don't pay attention to it," Lucia said, gripping the phone until her fingers hurt. "They're empty threats. He can't do anything." "Maybe you should move in with us," her mother offered. "At least for a while, until everything settles down." "Thanks, Mom," But I'll manage, Lucia smiled, even though her mother couldn't see it. I'm a big girl now. After the call, Lucia sat for a long time, staring at nothing. So Carlos decided to go after my parents now, to intimidate them, to make them feel guilty. Typical, attack where it hurts most. But it won't work, she thought with sudden resolve. I won't let him ruin my parents' happiness. The next few weeks turned into a real nightmare. Carlos seemed completely unhinged. He called Lucia's parents several times a day, sometimes threatening them with court, sometimes offering to settle things amicably by selling the apartment and giving him half the money. He showed up at Lucia's work, causing scenes and shouting that she had robbed him. Her colleagues watched with a mix of sympathy and confusion. Her boss eventually called her into his office and gently asked if she needed any help. Thank you, Rafael, Lucia smiled wearily. I'll manage. Divorce isn't the most pleasant process. If you need a good lawyer or a psychologist, just say the word, her boss patted her shoulder. You're a valuable employee. We don't want personal problems to interfere with your work. At the same time, Carlos's lawyer bombarded Lucia's attorney with a flurry of letters filled with new and ever more ridiculous claims. Now he was demanding compensation for emotional distress and intentional deception. Don't worry, her lawyer reassured Lucia. It's a standard pressure tactic. Legally, they don't have a case. Your money was spent lawfully, the apartment is properly registered. All they can really do is try to get on your nerves. But her nerves were already stretched thin. Her parents called every day, growing more and more anxious. Her father even suggested selling the apartment. Sweetheart, maybe it would be better to give him the money, he said. We can manage somehow, move back to the old apartment. No, Dad, Lucia was firm. No way. He's just trying to scare us, but it won't work. One sleepless night, an idea struck her. She picked up her phone and found the number of her old classmate Paloma, who worked as a journalist for a local newspaper. Paloma, hi. It's Lucia Gonzalez. Remember me? Lucia, of course. It's been ages. I have an unusual favor to ask. Lucia took a deep breath. You write about social issues, right? A week later, the article was out, Modern Misers, When Greed Destroys Families, a journalistic investigation by Paloma Moreno. Without mentioning real names, the article told the story of a woman who had scrimped and saved for 5 years to buy a home for her elderly parents living in terrible conditions, and about her husband, who, upon learning about the purchase, demanded half the value not to support his family, but to hand the money over to his mother, who already owned a spacious 3-bedroom apartment. Greed is one of the most destructive vices, Paloma wrote. It makes people see their loved ones not as living beings with needs and feelings, but as sources of material gain. It becomes especially apparent in family conflicts, when one spouse believes they have a right to everything the other possesses, even if it's help for elderly parents. The article quickly went viral across city social media groups. People discussed, debated, commented. Most sided with the heroine and harshly criticized the greedy husband. Of course, Carlos recognized himself. That same day, he called Lucia, furious. Did you set this up? You told that journalist about me? I don't know what you're talking about, Lucia replied calmly. What journalist? Don't pretend, Carlos shouted. That article is about us, now the whole city's gossiping. My mother's hysterical, my colleagues at school are asking if I'm that greedy husband. Strange that you think that, Lucia said, keeping her voice innocent. There are no names in the article, no specific details, just a typical situation. I know this is your doing, Carlos hissed. And I won't let it slide. But the threats were empty. After the article's release, Carlos's lawyer suddenly stopped bombarding Lucia's lawyer with letters. The calls to her parents ceased, and Carlos stopped showing up at her workplace as well. He's afraid of public scrutiny, the lawyer explained when Lucia shared her observations. It's one thing to sue your wife for money, it's another when everyone knows you're trying to take a roof away from elderly parents. The divorce was finalized 2 months later, quickly and quietly. Carlos made no claims to the property, only took his personal belongings and moved in with his mother. "Congratulations," the lawyer said, shaking Lucia's hand after the hearing. "You're free." "Thank you." Lucia felt a strange lightness. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You did it yourself," the lawyer smiled. "I only helped with the formalities." Stepping out of the courthouse, Lucia took a deep breath of fresh spring air, as if heavy chains had finally fallen from her shoulders. No more explaining herself, no more justifying every action, no more waiting for betrayal from someone who should have loved and supported her. She took out her phone and dialed her mother's number. "Mom, it's over. We're officially divorced." "Oh, sweetheart," her mother's voice was emotional. "How are you?" "I'm good," Lucia said, and it was true. "Better than good. I'm free. Come over for dinner," her mother invited. "We'll celebrate the start of your new life." 6 months later, Lucia had moved to a new apartment, smaller and farther from the city center, but completely hers. She had sold the old one. There were too many unpleasant memories attached to it. At work, she had been promoted. She now had her own team of designers and a higher salary. She no longer pinched pennies. She allowed herself new clothes, trips to the beauty salon, even small weekend getaways. Her parents had fully settled into their new apartment. Her father had set up a small winter garden on the balcony, growing flowers and even vegetables in special containers. Her mother could finally read in peace, without noisy neighbors or the fear of water dripping from the ceiling. One day, on her way home from work, Lucia stopped by a supermarket. As she was picking out groceries, she caught sight of a familiar figure out of the corner of her eye. Carlos was standing by the pasta shelf, scrutinizing prices. His clothes hung loosely on him. He had clearly lost weight, and early wrinkles lined his face. Lucia turned away, not wanting to meet his gaze, but he noticed her anyway. "Lucia," his voice was uncertain. "Hi." "Hello, Carlos," she nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "You look good," he said, letting his gaze linger on her new dress and expensive handbag. "Thank you." Lucia was about to walk away, but he suddenly grabbed her sleeve. "Wait, I wanted to apologize for everything. I was wrong." Lucia glanced at his hand, and he quickly let it go. "I'm glad you realized that," she said calmly. "But it's too late." "Maybe we could have coffee," he asked, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Talk? What for?" Lucia shrugged. "Everything's already been said and done." "I miss you," Carlos blurted out. "Every day I think about how I made a mistake, that I should have supported you instead of fighting you." Lucia looked carefully at her ex-husband. Once, she had loved this man. Once, she had believed they would build a happy family together, support each other, face hardships side by side. "I don't believe you," she said finally. "I don't believe you've changed. You just see that I'm doing fine without you, and now you want back what you lost." "That's not true," Carlos shook his head. "I really realize now how wrong I was." "And how's your mother?" Lucia asked. "Still living with the alcoholic father, or has she found another solution to her problems?" Carlos lowered his eyes. They made up," Carlos muttered. "Dad stopped drinking, for now." "You see?" Lucia smiled. "It all resolved itself, without my money." "Lucia, please, give me a chance." Carlos took a step toward her. "I understand everything now. I realize what I did. I'm glad for you." She stepped back, "but I have to go." "Goodbye, Carlos." She turned and walked toward the checkout, feeling his gaze on her back. Inside, there was no anger, no resentment, only a calm certainty that she had done the right thing, that this whole painful story had made her stronger and wiser. That evening, Lucia went to her parents' house for dinner. She told them about the encounter with Carlos, about his attempt to win her back. "And what do you feel?" her father asked carefully. "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second," Lucia shook her head confidently. I'm finally free, free from his claims, from his manipulations, from his endless dissatisfaction. I can live the way I want. You deserve it, sweetheart, her mother said, hugging her. After everything you've done for us. I did it for myself too. Lucia looked around the cozy apartment her parents now called home. It's important for me to know you live in decent conditions, that you no longer have to fear leaks or fights with neighbors. They stayed up late, reminiscing about the past, discussing the present, making plans for the future. Lucia looked at the happy faces of her parents and realized it had all been worth it. 5 years of saving, the stress of divorce, the fight to protect what was hers, all of it was worth it. On her way home, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 year, from an unhappy marriage and constant tension to freedom and the ability to live on her own terms. From the fear of losing her savings to the joy of seeing them turned into a warm, loving home for the people she cared about most. She took out her phone and opened a photo her father had sent earlier, his new balcony garden, blooming with all the colors of spring. In the background was a glimpse of the room, bright, spacious, furnished with love. Lucia smiled. This was true happiness. To see your loved ones enjoying life, to know you made it possible, and no amount of money, no Carlos with his claims, could ever take that away. She saved the photo as her phone's wallpaper, a reminder that the greatest values aren't measured in money, and that sometimes you have to let go of someone who's pulling you down in order to finally spread your wings and fly.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.